at LLGV, and as you probably all know, it's a very special lake in the middle of Bergen. But what you probably don't know is that our two main characters in our story is the King of Norway and the brown trout. So by the end of this presentation, we're hoping that you can see a link between the king, the trout, and LLGV.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to take you through a brief history. You've seen this picture before. So before 1928, it was a two-way water exchange between LLGV and LLGV. So seawater was going in, seawater was going out. And then after a while, this area here began to fill in, and it became more land area. So the exchange between the two became reduced, and it became a very stinky lake after a while. But today there's only freshwater runoff from rain that's going into the lake, and then there's a one-way flow out to LLGV. So there's no seawater going in anymore. So it's a freshwater environment now. So with our project, we wanted to find out if LLGV is suitable for human recreation, and also if trout are able to live there. And in May 2014, Norges Jeger- and Fiskerforbund, they arranged an event in Bergen, and they introduced 600 trout, and then they invited the king over to come fishing in the lake. So what we wanted to see is how the trout has affected LLGV. So how do we do this? We had 4 sites. We had 1, 2, and 3 at the edges of the lake, and then we had a 4th site in the middle, which was deeper. This is the deepest part of the lake. And we took measurements at surface and 1 meter at the edges, and then we took a depth profile in the middle, which was surface, 1 meter, 3 meter, and 6 meters. We took measurements of phosphorus and oxygen and TCB, and then we also took plankton samples, where we did horizontal or vertical sample in the middle. So we went like that with the net, and then we did a horizontal one on the edges.
Thank you. So what did we find? Well, in the following 3 figures, you'll see this vertical line down the middle of the graph, which shows the unacceptable threshold set by the Norwegian Environmental Agency. So in this case, the threshold set by the Norwegian Environmental Agency for human recreation for thermotolerant coliform bacteria is 100 colony-forming units. And what we found was that our values lay between 40 and 90 colony-forming units, which is well within the suitable range. And this was across all of our sites. For suitability for trout require a high level of oxygen, so we're looking to get values in this region. And the Norwegian Environmental Agency states that it should be higher than around 80% at the surface levels and higher than 70% when you go deeper. And what we found was high levels of oxygenation throughout the entire water column. However, for phosphorus, our values were way off the charts at 160 micrograms per liter, which is much higher than the unacceptable threshold for both trout and human recreation. And while this is lower than it has been in previous years, it's still quite a problem. So, Gudny, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happened with the food web in the lake?
So, the food web in LLGV is quite interesting because since the introduction of trout last year, it's been lacking a top predator for 20 years. That has led to high amounts of sticklebacks, which graze on the zooplankton. So we know the amount of sticklebacks from previous reports, and they have been filling traps within an hour previously. And among the zooplankton, there is generally a dominance of these small rotifers with a few crustaceans. And every year there's been reports of algal blooms, specifically these cyanobacteria. So what happened this year after trout have been introduced and stayed there for 1 year? So first of all, the amount of sticklebacks has been reduced. So there was a bio student that had a cage in a trap in the lake for 24 hours and didn't catch any stickleback. We got less zooplankton this year, but relative to the rotifers, we had more crustaceans. And the rotifers are less efficient grazers of phytoplankton, so we're happy to find more crustaceans. But the major shift that we saw this year was in the phytoplankton. So these circular volvox colonies here were completely dominating this year, and we couldn't find any of the cyanobacteria that was found in previous years. So, for recreational values, what does this mean?
Excuse
So-
me.
Oh, you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was wondering, can I go sunbathing by the lake?
Okay, right. Sunbathing. Well, Aurelian said that the TCB values were for the acceptable levels, so it should be safe to hang out and sunbathe along the lake, but you shouldn't drink it like he's trying here.
Okay. How about swimming? Like, if I get really warm, can I swim or splash my face?
Well, actually, one of the things now, when we're heading into winter and the autumn, we could see the trends for the coliform bacteria, and we're expecting them to reach above the threshold of 100 CFUs, and so then you could get sick if you have contact with the water.
Okay. But I prefer to swim in the summer.
Oh yeah, of course, the summer, right. Well, it seems that as though in the summer that it has less coliform bacteria, but we had the phosphorus levels that were really high, and the problem with high phosphorus levels is that we can't guarantee that there won't be toxic producing algae that will bloom again.
Okay. So the algae will be a continuous problem.
Well, actually, you can see here on this picture that this is from last year. That was a cyanobacteria bloom. This year we had the volvox bloom, and it's a very big color change. And another change with these phytoplankton is that the volvox algae is not toxic. It doesn't create toxin, as has been reported, while there are the species that have been found in the Lungosvan of cyanobacteria. These ones are among the genera that might produce toxins. And when you have these high phosphorus values, we can't guarantee that they won't come back.
Okay.
Excuse me? Is there any trout in the lake? And can I have a fish there?
Any trout? Well, we have evidence that there are trout. Weren't we talking a bit before the lecture? Didn't you say some of your friends found some trout and fished some trout out last year? Yeah. Well, so certainly you can fish in the lake. But to be honest, we're not entirely sure how many trout are left. But it's possible, we think. And the habitat is much more suitable this year compared to previous years for the trout. There's good oxygen throughout the lake. There's much better visibility, and the lake is almost entirely fresh water, whereas in the past there have still been remnants of saline water towards depth. So it's a very suitable habitat for trout.
But can I eat the fish?
Can you eat the fish? Well, again, some people have eaten the fish that they've caught in the past, and that fillet does look pretty tasty, doesn't it? But we would caution you though, because we haven't studied, and we don't have any reports of people who have studied the metal concentrations within the fish fillets. So we're not entirely sure if it's 100% safe. It probably is, but we're not sure.
But what about reproduction? Can the fish reproduce in the lake?
That's a good question. We're not so sure that it's possible for them to reproduce. Trout require a fairly complex substratum that's composed of gravel in order to lay their eggs. And in Lille Lunkegatsland, we've seen that it's mainly clay or mud throughout most of the lake and very rocky on the outside, so it's not suitable to lay eggs. And in addition, trout eggs require a constant, relatively strong flow of fresh water, which is not present in the lake either. So it's probably not ideal for trout reproduction.
It seems like you're a little bit unsure about the fish abundance.
You're very clever, Mr. Fisherman. It's true. We have actually quite a few uncertainties in our study. The number of trout in stickleback, as you say, we're not so sure. We didn't make estimates, and there haven't been many estimates in the past. We don't know the mortality rates of the trout since they've been introduced, nor how many people have fished. So we don't know. As for the zooplankton estimates, we're quite uncertain. as well. We're quite unconfident in our ability to detect the zooplankton and identify them, despite the fabulous help of our teaching assistant. We were quite incompetent. And while we would have expected this change to occur with fewer stickleback, an increase in zooplankton abundance, we didn't actually see this. If you remember from Gudni's explanations, the zooplankton actually was lower than previous years. And finally, we're not sure if volvox will stay. There are such high levels of phosphorus in the lake that we think that any phytoplankton can bloom in the following years. For all we know, cyanobacteria could come back and do some damage next year. We just don't know. On that note, Gudni, what are some of the recommendations for next year?
Well, it's good to be aware of the plankton composition and the water quality measurements so that we can keep following the trend over time. And also, it's good to have the estimates of the trout and the stickleback so that we know that if we can maintain a population, if people keep fishing, then maybe even the phosphorus levels will be reduced over time. So, for Bergen Kommune, we would like to suggest that you keep this trout population in the lake, so people can fish, and then if the population goes down, more trout can be introduced. So yeah, with a happy trout, we have happy king and happy people.
Okay.